So one of the things that, one of the libraries that we're going to end up making extensive use of is going to be jQuery. And let me just get myself ready here. So let's talk a little bit about what the need is for jQuery. Why do we have it? What does it do? Well, the methods that are available to manipulate the DOM. What do we mean by manipulating the DOM? We mean attaching event handlers to DOM elements. We mean adding nodes, removing nodes, adding whole sections of a page, that sort of thing. These are all things that we could do with what would be called native DOM methods. DOM methods, DOM properties. We could do that. But it's not fun. Okay? It's not fun. It's a little bit of a drag to do. And one of the libraries that has come along, it's been around for a while, that makes dealing with the DOM a heck of a lot more pleasurable is jQuery. So let's do a demo of this, something very simplistic, and see what all this means. Now the big sort of takeaway I always would tell students is that first of all we're going to bring in jQuery. Now how do we bring in jQuery? By the way, if this was our Express application, we would do an npm install of jQuery, and then we would end up doing a static route of our node modules folder to use jQuery. The other thing we could do is we could use a CDN version of jQuery, which is basically just jQuery that's sitting up on some server, and the server makes it available for you to use. When we're using JSBin and we want to bring in jQuery, what we do is we say add library, and we're going to go in and bring in jQuery, and it puts the script tag here of jQuery. Now I'm going to take out this output for a second. My starting point always with jQuery is to say console.log $. If I say console.log $, and I go to run it, it'll give me what looks to be a very simplistic function. That $sign is actually just the jQuery object. There's actually a term for this. When you end up using including a script file, and you have this global variable that you could use, it's UMD, Universal Module Declaration, or something along those lines. But just to sort of point something out, is that somewhere in this file the $sign is defined. So let me just show you another way that actually points to the same thing. Console.log jQuery is the same thing, and in fact, $sign equal to jQuery is going to be true. And let me do my console.clear so you don't see all this other stuff that's here. And you'll see that this is equal to true. Well, what are some of the things that we could end up doing with jQuery? Well, let's do something fairly simplistic. Let's actually grab in, I'm going to put another library here, library that we know and we use a lot. This is going to be my Bootstrap library. And what I'm going to do here on my page is put a very simplistic UI here, and I'm going to show my output here as well. And I'm going to go over here, and within the body of my page, I'm going to put a div. I'll give this a class of container. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put a button. I'm going to give this a class of btn, btn primary. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say, click me. Okay? So here's my button that's here. Let me actually also just put in a div, a class of well. And we'll talk about the few different things that we're going to end up doing here. So one thing that I want to do, the first thing that you always want to do with jQuery, I'm going to put an unordered list here. This is just to sort of show you what we're doing. And I'm going to say li use as selector. Now, one thing that's actually important to note is that when you're using JSBin, whatever script tags you end up putting here, these actually end up getting loaded after your HTML ends up getting loaded. All that JSBin is doing behind the scenes is taking this script that you're putting in here and puts it down underneath where the body is, so that this script ends up running before, but it gives us an easy way of sort of testing some logic out here. Now, what we want to do is we want to select some things with jQuery. So the $sign allows us to do a few different things. One of the things I can do with the $sign is I can say, hey, look, find me all the buttons. Okay? And I'm going to find all the buttons, and I'm going to remove them. Okay? So the $sign ends up getting used. Now, this is actually an important thing. Okay? When you use the $sign as a selector, okay, what you end up getting back is, I always call this a wrapped set. Okay? It's going to be a set of DOM elements that match $sign button. The same way that you would refer to a button in a style sheet is the same way that you could select them with jQuery. When you just do the string button, what it does is it looks for all button tags. So in other words, if I was to go in here, and again, what we're focused on here is jQuery as a selector. Notice both of my buttons are gone. Okay? Just for the sake of argument, jQuery lets us do some complex selecting. Now it just removes the first one. Now it just removes the last one. How do you know which is which? Well, how about if I do it a different way? Removing will actually take that DOM element and actually remove it from the DOM, because the DOM, the main thing about the DOM, when we think about the DOM is sort of this living, breathing tree structure that, when modified, changes what the user ends up seeing. So if we decided to do this and you wanted to know which one we were removing, instead of actually removing, let me make it a little bit more dynamic. And I'll say hide, but not just hide slowly. Right? Isn't that neat? Now you know it's the second one. Now you know it's the first one. Okay? Now, why would you want to hide as opposed to remove? Well, hide just basically sets the visibility, sets it not to display. Remove actually removes it for the DOM, but that's another exercise. When you're going to use one over the other, I wanted to do a little bit of animation. That's why I decided to do hide, because remove just removes it from the DOM. Now, when you can select something, let me just also show you that there's a number of different ways to select things. I'm going to take this first one, and I'm going to give this an ID of ClickMe. Okay? And instead of doing this, I'm going to go over here and I'll say $sign. So not only can I select by the fact that it's a tag, but I could select by ID. Okay? And I'm going to grab ClickMe, and I'm going to hide it. And it ends up disappearing. Notice only one of them ended up disappearing. Just to be clear, if I say slow, you'll see that it's only the first one, but it's not the first one because I ended up putting it first. It's the first one because I ended up getting it based on the ID. Behind the scenes, underneath, we built selector, and we built a version of it. So you have some familiarity with it. But what's happening behind the scenes is that behind the scenes, if it sees that $, it's probably using some form of document, get element by ID. Let me just get this bouncing out of here for a sec. So let's actually just go over a couple of things here. What I want to do is I actually want to put an event handler on this button. The way that jQuery allows you to put an event handler on something is you first have to go and select it. And then I could specify on, click, and I could call some function. Let's make this a little smaller. And I'll go over here and I'll say console.log, you click me. Okay, let's get rid of this second button because we're not really going to be using it right now. So we'll just use this one button. The point that I'm getting here, and again, I'm not turning you to an expert with selectors, but if you know how to do style sheets with selectors, using them with jQuery is pretty similar. So what this should do is that if I click on this, it should say, you click me. Okay? Let me tell you a common mistake that people make. They go over here, and they do this. Okay? Nothing breaks. Nothing ends up getting broken. There's no errors that you see show up. Even though there's nothing on the page with a ID of uppercase C, click me. Okay? And nothing happens here. And you're going to come to your instructor or your fellow that's here and saying, I don't know. What's going on, man? I mean, there's no error. Nothing's happening. Okay? And I always tell people, make sure, first thing I do is say, you sure you're finding what you're looking for? Because don't forget, when you end up using your selector, you get a wrapped set. That wrapped set might have 100 elements in it, might have 1, might also have 0. Okay? So the first thing I would say is, well, try this. Anything happen? Okay? Go look and see what your ID is. Okay? So I always tell people, before you start trying to attach event handlers to elements on the DOM, make sure you have them first. Okay? Another thing you could do here, just as an aside, if I went over here and I said click me's equals $ click me, okay? And I went over here and I said console.log click me's .length, I would see that it's 0, as opposed to if I do that, I found one and it's a length. So again, this really is a wrapped set of DOM elements. Okay? Now I'm back to 1, and in that case, let me go over here and do this, and get rid of this. And now I can see that this ended up getting clicked on. So what we're doing is we're using this as a selector. The other thing is, what do you think this points to here? Not totally clear here. Part of that could be just the way that JSBin works. But if you went in and looked at some of this stuff, you could probably find some stuff about the button. In fact, if I went over here and I said this dot tag name, you'd see, in fact, that it's a button. Okay? What if I try to do this? Getting ahead of myself here. What if I went over here and I said this dot hide? Okay? This is pointing to the button. I get an error that says hide is not a function. Because what's happening here is I'm wiring up, I'm using a jQuery wrap set to attach event handlers to whatever ends up matching this. In fact, we just have one button that's matching click me. The problem is that when I get into this callback, what I have here is a plain old DOM element. Okay? Here's another thing you can do with the $sign. Go in the other direction. Take your DOM element, turn it into a wrapped set, hide slow. Okay? Two different ways to use the $sign. Okay? You could use the $sign. Sometimes in some of the notes, it's called casting. Okay? It's not really casting. You're really just creating a wrapped set with that DOM element. Because again, by the way, the creators of jQuery could have done whatever they wanted to do. They could have had this be a jQuery wrapped set if they wanted to. But the standard behavior for an event handler on a DOM element is to get that DOM element back. So if you want to do something jQuery-like with it, you could end up doing that. If you didn't want to do something jQuery with it and you wanted to hide it, I don't know how you could hide it slow, but you might be able to do something like saying this. I'm going to try this. I don't know if this will even work. This.style.display equals none. I'm not even sure it's going to work. Let's see. It works. I have to really think about it.
So this would work notwithstanding that multiple DOM elements could have the click me identifier?
Well, they can't really. One of the things that jQuery does, if you use that $sign, at least they used to. I don't know if they still do. There was an assumption that that's going to be the only element that's on the page. But if you did, if there was a class called ClickMe, then you would basically be wiring up each of those buttons, and each of those buttons would end up getting hidden when you ended up clicking on them.
So this can refer to multiple DOM elements?
No, absolutely not. This is going to just refer to the DOM element that got clicked on. Okay? So
that's why the hide didn't work when you did this?
That's why.
When you originally
No, the reason why the hide didn't work is because if I say this dot hide, okay, a DOM element doesn't have a hide method. Okay? But a jQuery wrapped set has a hide method. Let me just bring up one other thing here. Okay? So this works. Okay? Let me just bring up one other thing. What do you think would happen here? This is simple enough. We could redo it. What if I did this? That's right, it should be the Windows object, right? So that's one reason when you're using jQuery, again, there are still reasons that you don't end up using the fat arrow syntax because, again, you want the context to be whatever jQuery is saying the context is, which is often, unless you did want the window object, normally you wouldn't. And so here, we're going to go and we're going to say $this dot hide. All right, now, let's do something a little bit more interesting here.
Can you do a bind?
Can do a bind.
Oh, so like you give that function to a variable and then you dot bind on something.
What would you want to bind to?
Either $this, I guess. I was curious if the dot bind function would work here.
With the dot bind function, yeah. I mean, you could, if you want to control the context, feel free to control the context. But that's up to you. I mean, we just controlled the context when we did the fat arrow, right? You could do it, but odds are, not odds are, you might want to control the context. In fact, I think we did control the context when if you go back to Game of Life, I think we ended up doing that. Yes, good question. So let's go over here. And let's modify this a little bit. Okay? So two things that we've done here. We can select things, right? We can wire up events. And we're also aware, which is very important, context of this in our callbacks, right? That's also pretty important as well. Now, let's actually go in here. And what we're going to end up doing, instead of doing this, is that every time that we click on this button, first time that we end up clicking on it, let's give it a value of 1, and we'll just keep on incrementing it every time. So one thing that we can do here is we could put an if, and not only can we, let's actually do this 2 different ways. When I click on this, I'm going to say this. So a lot of jQuery methods, it's the same method for setting and getting, but it depends on what you end up passing to it. So if I say this.html, and I just said console.log, and I say click me, it'll just give me the string click me. But if I went over here, and I said this.html, and I set it to a value of 1, when I click on it, it's going to end up turning into 1. I'm manipulating the DOM. So a lot of the jQuery methods give you the ability to go and manipulate the DOM. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and say, hey, look, if this.html is equal to click me, then in fact I'm going to set it to 1. Otherwise, and there's definitely going to be a more elegant way to do this, I'm going to set this.html. I'm going to end up saying this.html, and I'm just going to multiply this by 1, just so I have a number, and I'm going to add 1 to it. So if this works correctly and I don't have an error, I should go from 1 to 2, 3. Hold the applause. It's important. I want to get through this. Okay. So what you're seeing here is the ability to go and to manipulate the DOM. And just through these things, I'm going to show you really all the different ways you end up using jQuery. Now let's just say, for the sake of argument, that what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm also going to have a UL on this page. And I'm going to give the UL an ID of my list. Okay? And I'm going to go over here. And what I'm going to do is every time that this ends up getting clicked on, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to call a method called generateList. And again, this is not too dry, but that's okay for the moment. I'm going to take the HTML that I have here and I'm going to multiply it by 1. I'm going to generate a list of items. Right now, if I did this, I'd get this error. Generate list is not a function. But we'll go over here and we'll say generate list. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to get this number. And I don't like number. It's kind of a reserved word. Let's try count. And I'll say console.log count. So if I click on this, I should see 1, 2, so on and so forth. Now, here's the third way that the $ is going to end up getting used. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say, hey, look, for var, I equals 0, I less than count, I plus plus. So just let's do a console.log just so we can see this of I. 0, 0, 1, right? See the numbers keep on going. What I'm going to do here is every time that I go into here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list item. Third way to use jQuery. Give it a DOM fragment. And in fact, I'm going to use my backticks to say list item. And this is going to be count plus 1. So every time that I go through here, let's just say console.log li, just so we can see that we're not breaking anything. And that's because actually looks okay. Okay, let's go in here. We'll say li. Make sure I'm doing that correctly.
Should be
Yes, thank you. That could be one thing, but I don't know if that's the issue. Let's just see. Let's try this up here. Oh, yes, this is just going to be a jQuery object, right? If I went over here and I said dot li HTML, every time I click on this, I should see these numbers increasing. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to take my list. Another jQuery method you could use is you could find this wrapped set. This is going to be a wrapped set of one thing, and I'm going to append to it my list item. So now I click on this, I get 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, okay? Probably what I want to do is every time that I end up clicking on this, probably want to clear it out. So another thing you could do with jQuery, every time I go in here, I'm going to say my list, and I'm going to end up emptying it. So now when I click on this, it's going to empty this out. Now, let me also just go in a reverse order. So that's kind of a fun thing to do, but let's actually set it up so that I can also click on any of those list items, make them disappear, and make my button reflect the number of items. All right? So one of the things that I could do is that every time that I end up adding an item, okay, this is a list item, okay, this is a jQuery object, so there's nothing that prevents me. So again, we're seeing the $ used 3 different ways, right? Seeing the $ used as a selector, seeing the $ used to also task an object to a jQuery wrapped set, and seeing the $ used to create an element, okay? By the way, these are all things that you could do with native DOM methods. There's a native DOM method called createElement. You could create a list item. You could set its properties. You could do all this without jQuery. I leave it as an exercise. You could do it on your own. It's not a lot of fun.
Do we, in the HTML, have an element that has an identifier in my list? Or are we just on the fly creating an element?
No, we do. If we didn't, it wouldn't work. Okay, it wouldn't work. So here, if you look at the HTML, you see I ended up adding in my list here. Right? If we didn't have it, by the way, you know, just as an aside, if it's a good question.
You could create it.
I could have added it in dynamically, but just as an aside, if I went in over here, right, there's another one of those things. I'm doing the exact same thing you're doing, exactly the same thing, and my list won't empty. Right? No errors. Right? It's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to you, but here, right? And now this will end up working. So I want the reverse to happen. When I get rid of these, I want this to go away, and I want the number here to be 2. So how do I do that? Well, one of the things I could do is I could say li on click. Again, I don't want to use the fat arrow syntax. Okay? So one of the things that I have the ability to do is I could go over here and I could say li, $this dot remove. Right? So now, 1, 2, 3. I can make my 2 go away. I can make my 1 go away. But notice my button is not reflecting that value. Well, one of the things that's, again, another method that you could do with jQuery is we could go over here and we could say sibling count, $ this, siblings, .length. And if I go over here and I say console.log sibling count, if I click on this, it's going to tell me I have 3 siblings, I've got 2, I've got 1, and now I've got none. And all I'm going to do here is that I'm going to take this sibling count, I'm going to remove this guy, and I'll go over here and I'll say this, not this, but I'll say click me, .html, sibling count. So now when I do this, now I'm at 2, now I'm at 1, now I'm at 0. All right? Now that works and it's fine. One of the things that you're seeing here is that every time that I end up adding an element to the DOM, if I want this to work, every time that I add the element, I'm actually adding this click handler to the element. jQuery gives us a little bit of an easier way to do this. And the way that it could end up working here is to basically go over here and say, we have my list that's on the page. This is kind of a subtle thing, but jQuery allows us to do something like this. It allows us to say, by the way, if I go my list, .on, click, and I go over here and I say console.log this, and I'll just say .html so we can see what we have. This is kind of an interesting one because if I click on this and click on this, it'll show me the HTML that I have here. Okay? And what's actually happening under the covers, this is not really behavior that you might want, but what's happening under the covers is that I have a event handler that's on my list item, but my list item is clicked on. That since that list item is within my unordered list, this gets clicked on as well. So again, we could make it a little bit more interesting. If I get rid of the 7, I'll see this going all the way up to 6. And that depends on the order of the way that things happen. I don't want you to worry about that. What I want you to do instead is to say, let me make my life a little bit easier. Let's just think about how this reads. What this says is that, hey, look, my list is going to get clicked on. Okay? But specifically, what I'm interested in are any clicks on a list item that's in my list. Those list items might be there when this code runs, or they might be there later on. Okay? What that allows me to do is to take this code that's over here, bring it up here, and I could take this out. And the way that this reads is to say, hey, look, when my list that's on the page, okay, when it's clicked on, but specifically, when there's a list item that's clicked on, do this, okay? When the page first loads, there's no list items. There's no way to even click on this. Once I start adding the list items, even though I'm not adding the event handler here, the event handler's actually on the list, but jQuery goes and says, all right, I see the way that this is set up. I'm going to look not only at the list handler that gets clicked on, but if the list item itself ended up getting clicked on, and that context is going to be this list item. The point of the matter is that you could add event handlers to elements of the DOM, okay, before they get added. Okay? I mean, it's not, you're not really adding them before they get added. It's a little bit of a trick, which is that the DOM, the parent element, is listening for the clicks, but it's delegating the right context for the list item. So now this gives us the same result, but one could make the case it's a little bit more efficient. So here, the sort of last thing that we're looking at is we could say we're going to be wiring up events that are not in the DOM. Now, this is my intro as basic as I could possibly do with jQuery. I actually lied a little bit. We're going to do a little bit of we're going to do some slides, and we'll talk about how we're going to end up incorporating this into Trip Planner. Let me save this. Mitch, I saw that you had your hand up. Let me answer it in a second.